Gracious and kind Heavenly Father, we ask that you will be with us in a fantastic way today as we study, as we are starting to conclude our study of First Thessalonians. It has been an amazing study and one that I have talked about and told others about the things that I'm learning, the idea of discipleship and what that looks like, but also the example Paul gives of what needs to be talked about is pretty interesting. And so we ask today, Father, as we're in this chapter, chapter 5, that you would guide our discussion, that you would cause us to know the things that you want us to know. And then, as even the last question was, how does that impact us? How should we live in light of it? So help us to know that as well, because application is so important. But guide our discussion and cause us to know those things. And we ask for it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I've got this every time I lean forward, the sun's in my eyes. The sun shifting is kind of interesting up here. I see it all the time. Don't know if you see it as much where you are, but the sun will rise, or it'll rise over here in the winter, and then it rises over here in the summer. And I don't know if you've encountered anybody, but I've actually encountered somebody who very seriously believed in the flat Earth, and so stuff like that. I kind of go, how do you explain that? How do you explain because the sun will set at different places in different parts of the year, and we see it very clearly.
Yeah, Peggy. Yeah, they look at that because there's no curvature. They're looking at where the curvature when a plane flies, there it should be a curvature and it always stays, with its nose a landing, there's when it goes around the earth. I mean, that's one of the what
Well,
they
I'll,
look
I'll say about the curvature, and this is definitely a tangent, but my husband was a military pilot, but he was also an
Mhm.
airline pilot. We flew for the military. He flew around the world numerous times. And I don't just mean to different parts of the world, which he did. He literally would leave the East Coast of the United States and fly to Europe or Asia, and then come back by way of the West Coast and back to the United States. So he has
Mhm.
literally seen the curvature of the earth several times.
No, I mean, I don't
And
know that. That's what they, a lot of times that's what they're
I get,
looking at.
I know what you're saying, but
Yeah.
he actually tells that if you left Charleston, South Carolina, and wanted to fly to England, you don't fly what would seem to be a straight path. You have to fly up and over Greenland in order to get to England. It's a shorter distance because
Well,
of the curvature of the
well,
earth.
the pilots they all fly on a flat, it's no globe. Where they're looking at, they're flying. I don't know much about being a pilot, but this is the things that they talk about.
Yeah.
It's
But
on a flat.
I'm sorry, I even brought it up because we need to leave it
No,
because
okay,
it
no,
is,
I mean, there's some things that they look at facts. A pilot will fly on a flat map, not a round, because you look at the flat surface.
no, but you're wrong. And I'm not saying you're wrong. They're
Right.
wrong because they're not flying by a flat map. They're
Well,
flying
not well.
they're flying according to the curvature of the earth. They have to take it
Okay.
into consideration. So let's leave it, please. Let's leave it. No more
Okay.
because we're not arguing flat earth.
No, no, I just was, something that I never knew, but I'm just hearing other people's opinions. So,
Yes, and they have very strong opinions. And again, it's not an issue that we should separate people over, but just I don't even understand why they want to
oh,
leave that. But we're going to
well,
get into chapter
okay.
5, and as we look at First Thessalonians, we're going to look and remember where we are because it is important to understand what we're studying in chapter 5 to understand what Paul is addressing and why. We know in our segment divisions of this book that the first 3 chapters deal with Paul's relationship to the people in Thessalonica that are the believers, how he went there, how he shared the gospel with them, how they received the gospel. We know that we saw themes of affliction and we saw themes of discipleship and their walk, Paul's walk, things that were happening to Paul, because the affliction is not just Paul experiencing it, but the people in Thessalonica did as well, and we're continuing to experience affliction. Also, a theme is this emphasis on the coming of Christ, and we're going to look at that today. Also, we looked at it, well, every time, but we looked at it last week as we looked at the last part of chapter 4, and that would go into chapter 5, because again, this is one letter. This is not chapter divided letter. Paragraphs maybe, but not a division. But we do it for references and for understanding. Other people have put these, and we continue with them, with these chapter divisions and verses. But we need to think about those, that what was going on there. We also saw Paul desperately wanted to go back to see them, but he had been thwarted by Satan so that he couldn't. And his workaround was he sent Timothy. And Timothy went and came back by the time this letter was written. And apparently, there were questions that the people in Thessalonica had. So Paul is addressing those questions. And as we can take an example from Paul, we can understand that sometimes you don't just dive right back into whatever those questions are, because he didn't. He developed ideas of, again, putting the groundwork in of their relationship, putting the groundwork in of like why he is writing to this group of people, not for our sake, but for their sake, and just reminding. And I have pointed out Paul does not have any negative comments meant to be made to them, where he does in other letters, like the church at Corinth. He fusses at them. He fusses at them being on milk and not meat. He fusses at them about the man who was in a sexually immoral relationship in chapter 5 of First Corinthians. And it is a short chapter, but it's a very strong chapter with very strong words. Paul doesn't do that in this. If anything, he's commending them over and over again. Chapters 4 and 5 are dealing with instructions, dealing with answering these questions that they had. And so that's setting the stage for where we are. We're in this last chapter, and most chapters are going to end, most books are going to end letters with just like the greetings, the concluding statements, some maybe a prayer, that kind of thing. And so we have, I know I told you last week we had another week in chapter 4, and I was wrong. I don't even know why. I mean, I looked ahead. I thought maybe I was just looking at the lesson we were currently doing last week, but we do have another week in 5. I am right about that. So this week we will just look today at the first 12, verse 11, the first 11 verses. And then next week we will focus more on and finish up with the last of this chapter. So as we looked last week, when Paul started writing answers to their questions, the themes in chapter 4 were sexual immorality, and then it was love of the brethren and love of other people. And tied in with that love was work, labor, actually having a job. And then the last theme of that chapter was about, just to summarize it in one word, the rapture. This is what we believe that is talking about. But if nothing else, just those dead in Christ, giving them comfort in knowing that people that had died, this is what is true of them. People that had died in Christ. Because, and again, always put in context, the Thessalonians were dealing with persecution. They were dealing daily, all the time. They'd lost relationships, they'd lost jobs, they'd lost reputation, they were being, some of the deaths may have been the result of some of the persecution. We don't know that. He doesn't say this person died as a result of persecution, but it could have come at that. Like maybe they died of starvation, if, like they didn't have food. But the people of the church are taking care of each other. So there would be that. And that is the context for what is being said. So as we get into chapter 5, and we've rolled into another theme, another question is being answered. So we kind of need to know, like, he doesn't say, you ask this question, right? That's probably the way I would do it. If you wrote me a letter and had a question, I'd say, well, you asked this question, and then I would answer that question. That's not how Paul writes this. It's more relational. It's more, but they knew this is probably a very short time between Timothy being there and they had these questions. And maybe they even said, can you ask Paul? Can you ask Paul? Can you ask Paul? And Timothy's like, sure. Maybe he wrote it down in front of him. I don't know. We don't know that he carried back an actual written letter from them, but maybe he did. And if nothing else, he carried the words back and told Paul what was on their hearts and what they were concerned about. Keep in context, too, that this is a young group of believers, young in faith group of believers. They haven't been believers long. And yet, I don't know about you, but I'm blown away at what they already knew. And that means Paul did a great job. Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy did a great job in that first time that they were there because they're very well versed in things. But that doesn't mean they know everything. And Paul's even saying, I want to come back and complete the things that are lacking. So, our take from this can be we've already looked in a previous week. What should the gospel presentation include? But if we don't remember that what it should include is the hope of Christ's return. And that struck me. Like, if you asked me what the gospel should include, I'm not sure I would say that. And until now. I'm definitely thinking it differently. But did you ask yourself that question? Like, when I give the gospel, do I ever talk about Jesus's return? And do I give it in such a way that Paul addressing their questions doesn't deal with the fact of it? He deals with maybe specifics, like I say, tweaking the message a little bit, like adding some detail. Um, is that part of it? Another question, and these are questions I've asked myself or questions that have come to my mind. How often is your pastor, your church, talking about the return of Christ? Are you ready?
No, not too much. They don't go into that too much. They want to they want to get the gospel out there to preach the gospel. I know they want you to be members and serve, but I don't hear a whole lot what you're saying as far as the coming of the Lord.
Right.
You know.
And part of it is things I've heard, just things I've heard. I'm not excusing or explaining. I'm just telling you the things I've heard. But part of it is there are a lot of different views about, let's just say, eschatology, end times. Okay. But here's the thing, end times started with Jesus' incarnation, death, burial, and resurrection. That's when end times started. So are we in the end times?
Yes.
Yes. I tend to still think of them as future, distant, like coming, but not yet here, but we're living in them. So when you read about the end times, you need to think about we're living in them. It's a long period of time, and we don't know when they end. And there's a new age. But so we're living in the end times. And as you're saying, and I'm assuming others would probably say similar things, this isn't talked about much. Another reason is I don't know how many I've heard say, I just don't like, touching Revelation. It just doesn't make any sense. Or it's all allegory. Or, again, there's varying views. And so if you take a stand and have a particular view, that can, I don't know, can turn people off, cause controversy, disrupt. I don't know. But I just say, preach the word, right? If you, some of you in here have been with me when we've done Revelation, and Precept has a Revelation course that's 4 parts. It's literally like 2 years of study. If you do it in 2 semesters a year, you could technically get it done in a year and a half if you did 4 semesters a year. But, well, I guess if you did three, it's usually 3 semesters a year, sorry, if you have spring, fall, and summer. But technically you can, it's 4 different courses. They're awesome. It's probably my favorite of all. And because by the time you get done, the first course is very, 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 very different because you never get out of the book of Revelation. You do no cross-referencing, zero cross-referencing in the first one. Um, Actually, that's not true. The first one is the letters to the churches. The second one is the one when you start with chapter 3 and on, that you never leave the book of Revelation. So it's the second course. The third and fourth course, it's all cross-referencing. And you end up with this amazing chart at the end that puts all those passages in a timeline of where those events occur. And it really is incredible. I have gone through all 4 parts of Revelation once or twice. I've gone through the first 3 parts at least three or 4 times. And the reason for that was I kept moving and I wouldn't get to finish. So it's a life-changing course in my opinion, but it's a needed topic. And we're going to talk today. You did a lot of cross-referencing today. I hope I had to add pages. I had to add at least one piece of paper to my Day of the Lord list. I probably write too large, but I write a lot. You might not have. That's okay. But there was a lot of things that were repeated. We were going to look at some of that today. Probably won't get through all of it, but we want to start with, he starts this out saying, now, as to the times and epochs, or epochs, however you want to pronounce that, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. So if we just stop there, what does that tell you? Why would Paul not need to talk to them about this?
He's already told him about it.
He's already told them about it. So here again, without it being blatantly said, when I gave you the gospel presentation, it included this. When he was there and he was teaching them, he went beyond just the basic, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And I'm not trying to make that basic. That is tremendous. This Holy Week, this is what we're focusing on. What a wonderful time to be focusing on a lesson like this. But he went beyond that, is my point. He didn't. Sometimes if we think, what is the gospel, we think of salvation alone and what Christ did for our salvation. We don't think about the hope that we have of his return. And Paul talked about that. So he went, and I don't even know that we know how long he was with them. But in the period of time he was with him, which was probably short, he covered this. So he's saying to them, this is not a rebuke. He's just saying, now, as to times and epochs, you have no need of anything to be written to you. You looked up the 2 words, times and epochs. What did you learn?
Well, the times is chronos, and that is a sequential flow of seconds, minutes, hours, days. And epochs is measured by events and seasons type thing.
Okay. So we would put, let's say, the Holy Week as an epoch, right? Whereas Jesus's death would be a time, like there was a specific time. Now, Jesus's death actually is also an event, so you could put it in there as well. But we're not talking about looking at a watch and saying right now it's 10:19. Like that's the times part. Epochs is about a succession of events, or it could be the holidays, the feasts and festivals that God laid out for the Jews. Those would be in the epochs. But Paul, in the context of coming out of 4, when he's talking about meeting Christ in the air in the cloud, he's saying, now as to times and epochs. The question he is not answering, or maybe we should say the question he is answering, either way you want to answer this, he's not saying, I'm going to tell you when. He's not answering the question of when this is going to happen. He's talking about the certainty of it happening, meaning the day of the Lord, because we're going to be talking about the day of the Lord. He's talking about the certainty of it happening, and they know that. They already know that. So where what he's going to be addressing from kind of a pastoral perspective is how are you to live in light of knowing this?
Mhm.
Chuck Colson wrote a book, How Now Shall We Live, with Nancy Pearcey. Seems like there's another book of a similar title, and I was trying to look it up before to try to remember who wrote it, but somebody prior to Chuck Colson wrote a book, and it's from what you looked up this week. The title is from the idea of what Peter said in when he said, knowing this, how should that inform your life? Like, how now shall you live? How should we be living in light of all this? So this is what Paul is addressing. He's not saying, I'm going to set a date for you, or even in when we're talking about epics and we're talking about succession of events, he's not saying this happens, and then this happens, and then the day of the Lord. That's not what he's addressing. Now, maybe he addressed it that way when he was with them, but the question he's answering here is, you know, you're concerned about the day of the Lord, and I'm going to talk to you about how it impacts you, who you are in light of it, in relationship to it, and the emphasis is going to be how shall we live in light of it. Okay, so as we think about that, as because we all know, everybody here has been alive when there has been some group, and many actually, that have tried to set dates, or a person that's tried to set a date and say, on what is it today? Today's March 31st. So let's say next Sunday, which is our day that on our calendar to celebrate the resurrection of Christ this year. So that'd be April the 5th, I think it is. That's the day Jesus is returning. Like, I've just declared it, right? I'm not. Sorry, that's facetious. But that would be what some people have done. And then in light of that, their followers, what do their followers tend to do when they have that date and they're close to that date? If I said it's April 5th, this coming Sunday, and today it's Tuesday, how would you live Wednesday through Saturday?
Mhm.
Pretty good, I'd try.
Yeah, we would be on our best behavior, right? But a lot of times, too, what they would do is they would just stop life. They're not going to go to work. Why bother? Right? They're not going to do, they're when the dates are set like that, they usually end up go sit on a hill somewhere.
And that's what the Thessalonians were, that's how they were thinking. The Thessalonians were thinking that way.
If you think back to chapter 4, when he's emphasizing them working, it's very probable. It's very probable that there were people in the believing pool of people that were saying, why bother working? Jesus is coming. He's coming and it's imminent. Like it's happening. It's going to happen. So they were just like not working. And Paul is saying, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat.
Mhm.
And so, and I was talking to my husband about this because as a treasurer of the church, I just presented some financial reports to be presented in our members meeting, as our pastor calls it, members meeting. And the news wasn't great, just to tell you, the giving's down and spending's up. And there's some resistance at times to giving that news. But I was telling my husband as I was preparing this morning, I said, Paul is answering questions. We already talked about that. And he went over sexual immorality, and then he went over love. And he's talked about love several times. And they're great at it. They're great at it. But linked in to love was work. How is work linked into loving one another?
You're supposed to work to be able to have something for those in need
Yeah,
to show
right.
love.
And you not being one of those, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's tied together, and we see this in the church in Thessalonica in that day, and Paul's addressing it. But we see it today. We see it whether it's in our churches or just in our country. There's a huge difference of opinion right now about. And again, it's controversial. I'm just going to throw it out there. But should illegal immigrants A, be illegal and able to stay, and B, a suck on our society. Like they get free everything, but our citizens don't. I mean, I saw somebody post the other day that they were in an emergency room and their bill, their copay, or maybe it's a doctor's office, their copay, I think it was emergency, was like $125. But the person in front of them who was telling them that he was an undocumented migrant, illegal immigrant, free. But the citizen had to pay $125 copay. So you know what's coming out of their check is a premium payment. So they're paying for insurance, they have a copay, but that person gets everything for free. And if you know anything about the medical industry, everybody I know will tell you that they're using our emergency rooms as their primary care because they don't have insurance and they can't go to a doctor and pay cash. So they just go to the emergency room for everything, anything. And then our emergency rooms are packed and it's hours before you get, I mean, it's a compounding problem. And that's just one aspect. And we know we're hearing about all this fraud that's going on in Minnesota, but it's going on in other places as well. And and I'm gonna tell you, there's other countries that, well, there was a story I also read where this person was fed up with America, didn't want to deal with America anymore, moved to Canada, and found out had been living in California. Canada's rent or mortgage was at least twice what they had in California, and I can't even imagine what it was in California. And they did not get any health care, period, zero, not a drop of health care. And they couldn't get a job for 6 months because Canada has rules. Shock. Countries do. But here in America, we're giving all that stuff away. They get on the dole, they get free everything. And when I'm really on a soapbox, I know, but all of this was new to us, the Social Security, Medicare. My husband just went on, just retired a little over a year ago. And I decided at 62 to go on Social Security as well, just went ahead. And then he at 65 last year had to go on Medicare. Not had to, but automatically went on Medicare. I did not know that they would start taking Medicare payments out of his Social Security check. He's been paying in for 40 plus years, almost 50 years, and they're taking a Medicare premium payment out of his Social Security check. And we get to
I didn't know
pay.
that. Yeah. I didn't know that either. And my pension, they take also out of my pension.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, well, we have, thankfully, we're fortunate because we have military insurance. So our
mhm.
part B or whatever it's called is TRICARE. And TRICARE is not that great. A lot of places don't like it because they don't pay well. We fight them almost all the time, trying to get them to pay for things. But eventually, usually they do. But we don't have to pay for that. So we're very fortunate. Other people have to pay for that part on top of. So basically, their Social Security is eaten away by Medicare and insurance payments. And then I just did our taxes on Saturday for the first time, fully retired. Johnny fully retired. And we've got a huge tax payment that we have to pay because you have to pay taxes on your Social Security, which, by the way, was based on your income, which, by the way, you pay taxes on. So all that was taken from your check and given by your employer, they matched it, remember, had to, and it was all taxed prior. So you've paid taxes on that money, and now they're taxing that money when they give it to you because it's a benefit, right? I know it's awful. It's awful. And then when you look at the amount, after my husband started working when he was about 14, 15 years old and paid in, because he had to, paid in all those years and didn't retire until he was 64. So about 50 years. In all that time, his check is ridiculously low. And my check is based on him because I only had 36 quarters, not 40 or whatever the number is. I was 4 shy of work because I stayed home with my kids. So my check is ridiculously low. And eventually Medicare will come out of it. So it'll be that much more ridiculously low. But when you look at the payments that are being made to these
Yeah.
non-citizens, they're getting more than my husband's getting after working for 50 years.
Yeah,
And
I just they take about 40% out of you're paying 40% of your income to the government. Really, you are.
right,
And that's what they're doing. And I mean, 40% because you pay sales tax, you got all other kinds of
property
taxes on.
taxes and all that. I know.
Yeah.
And really, again, it's a soapbox I could definitely get on. I'm just trying to tie it into what we have done, and they call it a term that I've heard recently that I think fits. It's called toxic empathy. We are people in the United States are feeling like they're virtuous by giving away all this stuff, but they're
Mhm.
hurting the citizens of this country, and one day it might be them. So Paul's principle here, it's God's principle. God's principle is if you can, you work. And we were saying, Janice was saying, it helps you contribute to others that have needs. That's certainly a principle Paul lays out in many of his letters. Your
It's the
abundance
individual.
gives to somebody else's needs, and it is mutual. Like you might have a need someday, and it will be given to you, hopefully. But he also gives an example, and it might be the Thessalonians, that in their deep poverty, I forgot which group, in their deep poverty, they gave in abundance to someone else's need. And so, again, as a treasurer, I have these conversations a lot that teaching needs to be on giving. And it's a spiritual issue, it's a heart issue, like any other part of our spiritual life. Giving is part of it. And I make the statement, I don't have the numbers to back me up, to be honest with you, because I don't know what your salary is. So I can't know what your tithe is, right? But I can look at amounts and go, that's probably, it's probably a tithe. And people don't like getting into tithe because they think that's legalism. But Melchizedek, Abraham gave to Melchizedek more than 400 years before the law. So I think tithing is just simple, simple. And I think it's the minimum. I think we're to give above and beyond a tithe. But I also think the tithe goes to the church. If everyone in the church gave a tithe to the church, there would be no financial needs for the church. And then it needs to be managed well, like it needs to be stewarded well. But we also, Johnny and I give our tithes to the church, and then we support mission organizations, missionaries, precept ministries, so parachurch organizations. We have several that we give a small amount to, but it adds up for all of them, it adds up. And like a compassion child, that kind of thing. And we do that above and beyond our tithe. We don't take from the church to give to those things. If we did that, we should just tell the church to give it because we should be giving that separately. But it ties back in. I just, because of this is on my mind, I was tying it back in. Why is Paul saying love and work? Because if you love a group of people, you work to support them, whether that's your family, your children, whether that's your church and your community, whether that's your country. And again, part of the debate that's going on in America right now is the other side pointing fingers and saying, Jesus was a migrant. No, he wasn't. Jesus, he was a Roman citizen and he was traveling in the Roman citizen world. He was not a migrant. But
Yeah, but Paul too, he didn't want to be a burden to nobody, and
yeah,
he worked. He was attempt. He
and
worked.
he could have
Right.
expected, he could have
And,
expected support, and he got it from other places.
well,
But you're right, he chose.
well, you talk about immigration. When we came over to the country, we didn't want free handouts back when we were going to, immigrating
Ellis
here from.
Island. Yep.
Yeah, we weren't,
He
and
expected to work.
we
And so,
they came in ports of entry the right way, legally. They had and then you had to get a sponsor to sponsor you.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
Ilhan, whatever her name is sponsoring a whole bunch of people from Somalia. And they're making her stop doing that. So that's good. But anyway, yes, there were rules, there were custom laws, and our country needs boundaries, and every country needs boundaries, and every country needs to be able to support their citizenry first And it's nice if you've got the leftover to give to helping other people. I don't hate these people. I do not hate them. Well, I don't want the problems that are coming, but it's called toxic empathy because it's not true empathy to destroy your country by thinking, giving away all this stuff to people. But again, it's a principle, and the principle is there of work and labor. And I think we mentioned it last week when we were talking about it. Even in the garden, pre-fall, they cultivated the garden. They had work to do. I believe in heaven when we're no longer here. I believe we're going to have tasks because I think it would be a horrible eternity to sit around and do nothing. I can't even imagine
Yeah.
an eternity like that. Don't want to imagine an eternity like that. But the fall brought work as labor and a harsh. You're working against sin and the sin that is brought into the world. But
The
as we
work
get in,
that Paul,
God
I'm
created
sorry.
your body. No, go ahead. God created your body to work, to
Yes,
move, to move.
Janice,
Yeah.
you were going to say something?
the work that that I thought Paul was talking about is more of it's the individual working. It's not like in our society, this toxic empathy. It's not the society giving
Yes,
to help the poor. It's the government taking what is supposed to be allocated to something else
yes.
and using it for that, which is completely different.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And we see that again, the Social Security system is a great example of that, where that money, if somebody said they did the math and somebody posted about this, if in the 40 plus years that most people work in their career before they retire, if their average income over that 40-year period was not 30,000 a year, just 30,000, which nobody seems to be able to live on that anymore, but back in the day, 40 years ago, 30,000 was okay. But if your average income over the entire time was $30,000, they were showing that you would have put in over $1 million, like $1.4 million into Social Security, and forgetting that your employer matched that. So that would be like 2.8 million, right? And then we know anything we know about interest, right? If that money had actually been invested, and I said this the other day, we should have got Nancy Pelosi to be over Social Security because she's outdone every financial brain out there with her investments.
Yeah.
But anyway, if it had just been invested at a nominal 6% growth rate over that same period, it'd be worth multiple millions of dollars. So had they let the money come into Social Security and grow, there'd be no
I just
problems. But
think
they
everybody
didn't.
should be responsible for their own retirement, their
I agree.
own money.
I agree.
The government
Should have nothing to do with it.
cannot spend money.
We should be allowed to opt out. And then you're responsible, right? That you would have to sign this thing saying you're responsible for your own
Yeah.
income. The idea was a toxic empathy. The idea was nice. We're going to help people because so many people were destitute in their retirement years. And sometimes that came because a business went under or whatever. We saw in our time here, sorry, we're really not on topic today, but we saw during our time here when some of the airlines just declared bankruptcy and the government allowed them to declare bankruptcy and take people's pensions. So there were retired airline.
Delta did.
Yes, there were
We lost.
retired airline people showing up at Walmart to be Walmart greeters because there's nothing wrong with being a Walmart greeter, but having to get jobs to pay their mortgages after retirement because their retirement was taken away. So when companies started doing 401ks and you owned it, they didn't. They might contribute and they might have matching or some sort of something contributing to it, like they would have done your pension. It changed that, and it was so much better for the person to own their account. And a lot of times when they owned it, they would contribute to it better, rather than they're not going to contribute into a company pension. So anyway, that's part of the government should stay out of it, should have stayed out of it. And it's another issue of another example of when the government runs something, they mess it up. So we do not want more government running things. So when we get back to this subject that Paul is dealing with, sorry, I am completely responsible for this side talk.
Okay.
But it's part of applying what's going on to what's going on in our world today. And I get really caught up in it sometimes and kind of feel a little bit anxious or a lot anxious. And then I sometimes take that step back in perspective and go, every midterm swings. I don't know that there's ever been a midterm that remains. So it probably will swing again. And that's not the worst thing in the world. And having the majority hasn't helped anything in the first 2 years. So I don't know that it's going to hurt anything later. But the other is, this is what I'm looking for. That my hope is in God. My hope is not in our government or in a man, especially. But But at the same time, we are Americans. We do have a government, and we have responsibility, in my opinion, to like the process of voting and stuff. But when Paul's talking to them, he's saying, I don't need to tell you about the times and epochs. There's things that are going to happen. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there when Paul was teaching on those the first time, right? But we've got it. We've got it in scripture. But he says, you know full well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Okay, so we looked at the day of the Lord this week. Okay, and here we see thief in the night. It will come like a thief in the night. Okay, so that's said, and Peter said it as well. So when you did your cross-referencing, you saw that. Now, let's think for just a second. When it says thief in the night, is that a good thing? I mean, if you woke up tomorrow and your front door was standing wide open and half of your furniture was gone, would you say, wow, that was fun?
No, it doesn't sound like a good thing.
No. And if you woke up to someone breaking into your house, would you go and welcome them in? No. So this is not a good thing. He's using this terminology for several reasons. Do you ever expect a thief to come to your house? Like, you're not looking forward to it. You're not saying tonight's the night, the thief is coming. You're not ever saying that. And it's not a positive thing, right? So this is not good. Okay. Now, again, and Peter says this as well. So Paul's not the only person that says this. And in the context of this, there's in verse 3, and Jim, I think you pointed this out in a different lesson, but they're saying, what are they saying? What are they saying? Because we're going to put the theys up there. They and we's.
Yeah, they were saying peace and safety, that's what they're talking about, what the world's going to be like, what it's going to look like,
Right.
at that time.
Right. So right now, with what's in our news and what's going on right now, would we say peace and safety?
No, but I know there's something where the Antichrist, that's what he's going to bring in, peace. He's going to want peace because people are going to get so tired of wars and all these wars going on and conflict. That's what going to be a sign that he's going to bring peace through all these nations.
Yeah, for the first 3.5 years of the 7 years, he's going to start it with a covenant he has signed for a 7-year agreement, and he's going to break it in the middle. But yes, he's going to appear to bring peace. But here in America, we could say this. Like, do you ever wake up to bombs going off outside your house?
No.
No. I don't think America's real peaceful right now. I mean, there's protests going on. There's all kinds of horrible murders and stuff going on. But as a nation, we haven't had our borders breached since 9/11. We are living in a time of peace and safety. Okay, so we could say this. Now, if you're in Iran, you're not saying that. If you're in Israel, you're not saying that. If you're in pretty much anywhere in the Middle East, you're not saying that. you're hearing those bombs pretty much daily. And that's a way of life in many of those places. Okay. So we could take pockets and say, well, it's not peace and safety there now. And are we involved in that? Yes, as a nation, we're involved in what's going on right now, but you and I are living in peace and safety. Okay. So then put it back into the times of Paul writing this to this group of people. They're under Roman rule. And when I was teaching my kids homeschooling, there was a principle that came out over and over and over again in our history lessons. And that is, and somebody said it better, I'm just going to paraphrase. People always give up their freedom for safety. And you just put that into any country's history, any context, any time. And think about, even in our nation, think about yourself. There are times when we're willing to put ourselves under the authority of someone who's promising us protection. It happens over and over and over again on a small scale and on a large scale, like a nation scale. And Johnny wanted me to listen to this book with him called The Hajj. And I don't know if any of y'all have read it, but it's helping me at least grasp the mindset of Islam, which we're listening to it on Audible, and I keep pausing it and fussing. We're never going to get through this book, but in it, there was this one statement, and he's talking about Bedouins. This is back in the 1800s, this part. And he's talking about all these different groups in this area. And he's talking about the Bedouins and all this. Bedouins were the nomadic. And they thought their nomad lifestyle was a lifestyle of freedom. They would not give that up. Like, they did not want to be anchored somewhere. And that this is another, hard work was immoral. That's part of their mindset. Hard work was immoral. So the leader, and they have different names for him, Sheikh was one, but there were other names. The leader would take over by power, sometimes by succession, like their dad and the son. But they had to earn it, and they had to overpower the other leaders in order to become powerful. But the goal was to be the leader, so you did nothing. You just earned rents from people and treated people horribly and were an oppressor. But if you got to be doing nothing, that was the goal. It's just an interesting backwards mindset in many ways, backwards to us mindset. That's the reason I again stopped it one day and went, and this is why people are saying it's not compatible with the West. It is not at all. We do not think this way. But there's more to why. But anyway, at one point he was talking about this other group coming in and being stronger than the two or three he had mentioned, including the Bedouins, and because there was always this fighting going on. Like during the day, all these laborers, the people that worked the fields and all, were being robbed by this group. At night, they were being robbed by this group. And then the pilgrims, the people would be on the roads, were being robbed by this other group. And so this fourth group came in and overpowered those three. And everybody was glad because all of the infighting and constant daily problems stopped. But then that group took all their money, made them work hard. They never had property. They never had anything. But it was, in their eyes, better than being in the middle of all these conflicts and wars and battles all the time. They gave up their freedom for protection and safety. The idea of protection and safety. You think of every dictator out there. He came in, and Hitler offered them the world and ended up being one of the worst people in the history of the world. And they gave up to him their freedom in order to get the safety and prosperity he was offering. So this is true over and over and over. You could I don't know that much about history, but every history, I can name several places. And it was in that book, and it reminded me of this point. They're saying peace and safety. So in the day, like Jim's talking, someday this Antichrist is going to come along and he's going to offer that. He's going to offer, we're going to sign this contract, this covenant, and we're going to promise you for 7 years, we're going to promise you there will be no wars, peace and safety. And that's not necessarily what Paul is referring to here, though. Let's keep that in mind. They are saying peace and safety. In Rome, in Thessalonica, Cicero, by the way, was there about 100 years prior to this, and he complained about all this stuff. But there had been, after Caesar was killed, Julius Caesar was killed, there was a lot of battling back and forth over who was going to end up being the leader of Rome, right? Thessalonica was one of those places that would align themselves with like Mark Antony, and then Mark Antony would get taken up, like he would lose, and then they would have to change their allegiance to somebody else. And it was just this conflict and turmoil for a long, long time. But at the time Paul is writing this, Rome has conquered, and there's peace and safety in Thessalonica at this point in time because they're under Roman rule. They may not like it, and they may not have all the freedoms they want. They have a semi-freedom. Like they seem to be able to kind of do whatever they want, but they're still ultimately under Caesar at this point. Okay. And so there's a seemingly relative peace and safety at this point. So that's part of what he's speaking to, is you're saying peace and safety. It says, then destruction will come on them suddenly, like birth pangs upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Okay, there's a lot in that. But let's again think about what a woman is expecting. We kind of know 40 weeks, right? I had one of my children at 37 weeks. Okay, I could have said, no, I refuse to have this child today. I've got a timetable. There's a date on a calendar. I refuse. That's not what happens, is it? Right? The birth pangs come on you, and there is an end result. That's another thing you don't have any control over. It's how long that's going to take. I was very fortunate. My longest labor was 5 hours. Most of them were 4. But some can be days. You don't have control over that either, right? So when he's using birth pangs, that's part of what he's talking about. But also, when Paul is writing this, there are many women on their death certificate, it said they died of birth pangs. Women died in childbirth a lot in the old times. We've kind of overcome that. People still die today, but it's rare. It's very rare. And babies don't die as much either. It's rare, but we haven't overcome it completely. But so when Paul is talking about birth pangs, he's talking about, you don't know the day or the hour. You kind of know, like you're not going to go 4 years pregnant. You kind of know when it's going to end, and yet you don't know how long that's going to take, the actual delivery. You don't know that, and you don't know that you're going to live through it.
It's just unpredictable.
Yes.
I mean, there's no specific calendar date or anything. I mean, it's just unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to happen.
We don't, but we also do know there are signs, there are things that we can look at. We can be somewhat predictive. Like I'm sitting outside now because it's warm. If I had no calendar and no concept of time, woke up out of a coma or whatever, and looked outside and saw the dogwoods in bloom, which that's here, sorry, I don't know where you are, but here the dogwoods are in bloom, guess what I would know? It's springtime, right? If there was snow on the ground, I would know it's wintertime. If the thermometer read, 90 something degrees, I would know that it was summertime. So there's some clues, but not conclusive things. And that's not what Paul's dealing with. He's not dealing with setting times and dates. He's talking about what we need to be prepared for, right? So he's saying it's going to come on them like birth pangs. But also that last part, no escape. I was watching a show last night where a young woman was delivering her child, and at one point she goes, "I don't want to do this anymore." I love when they write that stuff in. It's like, yes, too late. Should have thought of that about 10 months ago. But no, it's you don't get to decide, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this. Okay, but remember, these are the theys. And you did some lists this week of the theys and the unbelievers and all that, and those charts were basically the same. You gave the same list pretty much over and over, which is great for repetition. But it says, but you, and I said we, but it could be you, up here. He calls them brethren. So we know that these are believers. He said, are not in darkness. That the day, and he is specifically talking about the day of the Lord because he's already mentioned the day of the Lord, that the day should overtake you like a thief. So even though the day of the Lord's like a thief in the night, it's not going to overtake them. You are all sons of light and sons of day. So let us not sleep as others do. Let us be alert and sober. Not sleep, alert, and sober. So this is all on the you or we part, and it says, for those who sleep, do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk, do their drinking at night. So these are sleep and drunk. Now, did it say they? He said those in this case, but he's referring to another group. So they sleep and they get drunk, and they do it at night. And because we've said you're not in darkness, you're not going to sleep, you're going to be alert and sober, night is connected to the darkness, right? I mean, it's kind of like a stupid thing for me to have to say, but it's all connected. And it says, since we are of the day, let us be sober. We've already got that written. Having put on the breastplate of faith and hope. Did it say hope? Am I right about that? Breastplate, love, sorry.
Love.
And then it's the helmet of the hope of salvation. Okay. Hopefully, this made you think of the full armor of God in Ephesians 6, because we've looked at that also. But
I'm sorry, there's another thing I also was looked at, like spiritual laziness, spiritual slumber. Because we get lazy with a lot, the word. So I mean, I sort of connected that too with that.
absolutely, absolutely. And I'm kind of putting this up here, and then we can kind of talk about it, but you're absolutely right about that. But the breastplate in Ephesians is the breastplate of righteousness. Here it says faith and love. And then the helmet of the hope of salvation, it's the helmet of salvation in Ephesians, but we're not putting on and hoping we get saved. This is hope as in that expectation of. So, and remember, salvation, while it is a moment in time in your life, it's an ongoing thing, but also there's saved from certain things, like it's saved from hell, yes. But in this life, we're saved from having to sin. We're saved unto being able to walk in righteousness. There's a lot of ways we can put that. And the next verse says, since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on, I'm sorry, the next verse 9 is, for God has not destined us, the we, you, not destined for wrath. So here they are destined for wrath. But for obtaining salvation through Jesus, who died for us, whether we are awake or asleep, we may live together with him. Okay, so one of the, I hate to even bring up kind of confusing things about this passage is in chapter 4, we were looking at those who were asleep, and we did cross-referencing, but even within that passage, we see that those who are asleep are dead in Christ, right? So here, though, when he's talking about asleep, he's not talking, this last verse, he's talking about awake or asleep. So those who are alive and remain in that verse 10 are the awake. Those who are asleep in verse 10 are the dead in Christ. So we will be together with him. We saw that in chapter 4. But the rest of this, when he's talking about sleep, he's not talking about being dead in Christ. And I think you get that in the context. This is where it's one of the places that we can absolutely say context is extremely important, right? I can't just take a verse out of here and say, like if I said verse 6, let us not sleep. Well, if I had a choice, I'd rather be raptured before I died instead of died. But I'm not, this is not saying don't be a dead in Christ. It's saying, as Jim was saying, don't be complacent. Don't be, what else would you think? If you were talking about the context here about being asleep or being not asleep, being alert and sober, what does that look like in a Christian's life?
Walking in the Spirit
Yes.
so that you can discern the times.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And in discerning the times, which would fit here for sure, and even chapter 4 and chapter 5, in talking about like the day of the Lord, or talking about when Christ comes and we meet him in the air, any of these events, those times, we walk in light of them. We can discern some of the signs that they're coming, like a pregnant woman can know that she's going to have a baby. Or like I said, I think Jesus even said, when you see a tree in bloom, you know the season, right? I think he said the fig tree, but we know the seasons. I talked about dogwoods, but any of those things are ways to help us understand this, but we're not to be like snoozing through life. We as Christians, what, Jim?
Yeah, live in a state of constant readiness.
Yes.
I,
Right. Yes,
I
it's
mean,
not just
yeah.
being alert, it's being in that constant state of readiness. That's the big overarching point he's making in this passage. Again, we're not setting times. That's not the important thing. It's living in readiness.
Mhm.
Think about, this was written 2,000 years ago ish, it something like that. And they're living every day with that readiness. Paul wrote about it, talked about it, taught it, and lived it, to live every day thinking this could be the day. And it takes a lesson like this sometimes, or again, when I was studying Revelation, the one thing that kept coming up when I was studying, every time I was studying Revelation, is I don't want anybody to go through this.
Mhm.
So it gave me the biggest emphasis for giving the gospel of anything. And our churches aren't teaching it.
No, and another thing I point out she said that too, yes, last week, that it gives you a good fear of the Lord. And
Yeah.
I don't think we do. I don't hear this in the pulpit a lot, but I think if people keep hearing it, you want to be ready, because it gives you a good fear of the Lord. That's what Kay Arthur was saying last week.
No, you're right. It absolutely does. And it gives you that complete fear. Like, we do need to revere him, and we need to have a
Yeah.
reverential worship of him. But there is that aspect of, he's talking about wrath here.
Hmm.
and it's God's wrath. He's not talking about some general wrath. He's not talking about some guy that's going to come and be bad to you, like we could say Hitler or Mussolini or Saddam Hussein or Ayatollah Khomeini, any of those. Like we can name any of those that we know of in our lifetime, or I wasn't around for Hitler, but I know about him. But we could, or Mussolini, I didn't know, I wasn't around for him either. Anyway, we can know about them, but and we can have lived through some of these people, but he's not talking about, he might use people, but he's talking about his wrath. So the wrath the day of the Lord is a day of wrath. And I'll say of God's wrath. When you did your cross-referencing, what else did you learn that was true of this time? Sometimes it was noticeable things like darkness, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sun and moon being dark, stars being dark. Sometimes they turn to blood, it would be referred to. It's a horrible, or it's a horrible time. I don't think horrible is on any of my lists, but it's just a concluding statement. And in our next time when we do Second Thessalonians, we looked up those verses, but we're going to study them when we get there. But it talks about this man of lawlessness, and the apostasy has to happen first, and he's going to go into the temple and set himself up as God. There's, all of that has to happen prior to the day of the Lord. So again, are there going to be epics? Yeah, there's going to be events. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen. That's going to happen and boom, the next day or that day it's happening. Just means these things have to happen before. If you notice last week, I said, I believe in the rapture. I believe that passage in chapter 4 is talking about the rapture. Not everybody believes that, but I do. And I said, nothing has to happen before that happens. Whereas when you start that timeline of 7 years, starts with a covenant, there's a mid part at 3.5 years, and then there's an end. There's things that happen in succession. So this event doesn't happen until that event happens. It goes on and on. You can timeline it, but there's nothing that has to happen prior to the rapture. Jesus coming to take us home.
There's not a lot of teaching on the wrath of the Lord either. They don't.
Well, I'll be honest with you, just so that there are many that do not believe in it because one of the reasons is they say it's a modern teaching, that it was not a teaching from the early days of the church.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the early church, Paul's talking about it. So how can you say it wasn't talked about? But maybe in church documents they don't see it. I don't know. That's not the only, I mean, did they all just understand it so they didn't talk about it? I don't know. I don't understand. I'm just giving you that's one of the reasons that some people believe
Yeah.
it's a new
But he's
teaching.
coming back in judgment, so
Yeah, we know
he's
we
gonna
know this
he's
because
gonna come back as a lion. He's not gonna come back as a lamb. He's coming back as a lion,
right.
and to just So I mean, a lot of people we don't really talk about that a lot.
No, they want to talk about Jesus being a God of love and
Mhm.
basically inclusivity, everybody's included. Instead of, like you're saying, when he came the first time, he did not come to judge the world. Now,
Mm-mm.
in the fact that he did come, there is a judgment because of him. Like there's a judgment because he came and he died, and there's people that don't believe that. So it's the basis on which there is. But when he comes again, you're right. He comes to judge. Read chapter 19 of Revelation. He
Mm-hmm.
comes and there's a war, there's a sword that comes out of his mouth, and everybody that opposes him, that came against him, dies. But you can also see it. You saw so many this week. You saw that was a lot. I'm glad they gave 2 days for it, but it was still a lot that you
Yeah.
saw in Isaiah and in Joel. And I mean, it's like the whole book of Joel, right? And Obadiah and Zephaniah. Um, and yeah, Zephaniah was, and then Acts and Peter. Um, so Jesus talked about it. Um, Peter and Paul write about it. The Old Testament prophets wrote about it. Um, And it's not a good thing in the sense of what we would say good. It's a good thing because God's doing it and there's a purpose to it. I'm just saying it's not something I would ever want to wish on anyone, right?
And I would,
No. So, and also realize that a day, like it's saying here, doesn't necessarily mean a 24-hour period. It can mean a time or an age or a series that ends, has a beginning and an end. But again, they're talking about wailing, they're talking about darkness, talking about fire. Fire was in a lot of it, fire and burning, um, destruction.
But is it like it's hard to tell when the difference between the destruction of Jerusalem, and the temple twice and Israel being taken into captivity. So I don't know where the line is, when is he talking about that and when or just any of these Old Testament prophets and when are they talking about the second coming of Christ?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's difficult. It's very difficult. And you can't just go to one place. God's revelation is progressive. And he gives like Joel something and he gives Obadiah something. And in some cases it was a specific word against, let's say, Edom in one case, right? But then it flows into more. Like it's not just Edom anymore. It can be something bigger. And in a lot of those prophecies, there was a near fulfillment with a far fulfillment coming. Like this would be kind of a picture of something that's going to happen later, but there would be specific events at that time. So it is confusing. Don't get me wrong. Mainly, Paul is also is reminding them of the certainty of it. There is a certainty to the day of the Lord. This is not you and me wishing doom and gloom on people. This is from God. He's been talking about it for a long, long time. Okay. Some of the things we can absolutely know is it's going to happen and it will be destructive, very destructive. But to get to a little bit about Israel or Jerusalem in particular, I think it's Zechariah that talks about 2/3 will be cut off and 1/3 will remain. And that means of the Jews in this very, very end. 2/3 will be cut off, 1/3 will remain. Now, I mention all the time, I will never turn my back on Israel personally. Our country may, and I hope they don't, but and and right now what's going on, but that doesn't mean that I, applaud everything Israel does or the decisions the government makes, let's say, right? But I'm for God's people. No matter what, I will never turn my back on them. And I believe any nation that does God will judge. So I don't want America to turn their back on Israel. But you don't, just like I mention this all the time, like you with your children, like you'll never turn your back on your children, but do you approve of everything they do? No. And you have an opinion about it, and you probably to give your opinion or maybe cautiously try to give your opinion. That's kind of that type of role that we need to play, not parent to child, but just that we might love God's people, but we don't always love what they do, right? Any more than he loves everything America does for that matter. But when you get to it's not a simple answer. I cannot sit here and say this is exactly what you need to believe and this is what it takes study. And even though I have studied Revelation for years and have studied those passages, I get away from it and the details are not as I can't remember them all as clearly, but I remember a lot of them. And there is a period of time coming, 7 years. It's 1260 days. It's time times and half a time. All of these are references. Time times and half a time is 3.5. But that it's all part of that. And then there's a midpoint to that. And that's a very significant time. There's things that happen prior to that. There's things that happen after that. And it's a very, very definite time. But we're not in that 7 years yet. And we may or may, depending on how you view those 7 years, you may say the rapture happens before it. You may say the rapture happens at the midpoint. or you may say the rapture happens at the end. That one's the hard one that I don't get. I don't get that one at all. I could almost make a case for either of the first two, for before the 7 years or the midterm of the 7 years. But the point is, you would have to determine when the wrath of God is in connection to that 7 years. Because in the book of Revelation, the bowls being poured out, he's pouring out the wrath of God on the earth.
Mhm.
Okay. So you know that is the wrath of God, right? But is everything prior to that in the book of Revelation the wrath of God? You have to, and the thing is, it's not up to us to decide it. It's as you study it, so I leave these things somewhat with an open hand. I can study them, I can believe what I believe, and I can understand it. But if I'm wrong, I've got to be okay with that. I've got to be okay with God in that. Not, and I don't want to teach things that take away or add to, but because Revelation warns about that as well. But when you're looking at this day of the Lord is the wrath of God. And the certainty that we can take from that is it's going to happen and we're not going to experience it. We're
But
not
there
destined for that.
there have been other wraths of God, right? When, like one of these is about Babylon getting destroyed, right? And one of the cross references, several of them have been about Jerusalem getting destroyed. So the days of the Lord are multiple, right?
Well, I think there are more than one day in the day of the Lord. Like, I think it's a period of time. But and I don't disagree with you that God has brought judgment at times, but to talk about the wrath of God, or the great wrath of God, or the great day of the Lord, I think that is a very, very specific time and situation. And we're not destined for that. That's praise God for that. But I will say, yes, the other is think about the context of when the Thessalonians are experiencing this, they're experiencing persecution. And one of the things I think Paul is trying to help them understand is what you're experiencing is not the wrath of God. So, like when you or I go through really hard times in this life, because we're Christians, and if that is a certainty, if that is true, we don't experience the wrath of God. As a matter of fact, we're told there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Okay. Will we be judged? Yeah, for every word that proceeds out of our mouth, but there's no condemnation. There's a big difference. If you think about a court in America, even, hopefully you've never been to one, but we know about them, right? And there's a judge and there's a jury, and then there's a defendant and a plaintiff. You've got all of those factors in there, and then you've got advocates, the lawyers, the attorneys. And so we can put some of that back into here, but the main thing I want you, when a verdict is given of guilty, let's say, a guilty verdict is not their punishment, it's the judgment. Do you see the difference? Their punishment is whatever sentence they're given. There's a difference. So this is the sentence based on their judgment, yes. But the judgment itself is just a declaration, innocent or guilty. From that innocent or guilty come through hopefully the judicial system, our justice system, which is not working right now, but hopefully comes a period of time in prison or a fine or whatever follows. That is the quote condemnation or punishment, right? As a Christian, we may face judgment, but we don't face condemnation, which ultimately would be hell. So we can look in light of
Oh,
that.
no. Yeah, the context, what I'm getting out of this to chapter 5, the context with Paul's telling, he's talking about the day of the Lord, but he's really telling them how to live. I mean,
Well,
I
number
think,
one, live
I
praising
think
God
that's the
that we
point.
don't face it.
Yeah, that's the point I think he wants to get across about them not being in darkness, be your sons of light. You're not your sons of the day, and to, carry that out, and be ready. And I
Yes.
think that's a good, this is good as far as application. And you know, that's what I think Paul really is trying to come across about. So, you know, living a sober life, to put on the breastplate of faith and love. And we know it's coming, but he wants us to really, you know, understand how to walk, how to walk with
Absolutely.
them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Janice, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to address what Becky was saying. From what I understood, the day of the Lord is the cup of his full, it's a full cup of his fierce wrath,
Yeah.
which has never been poured out. So a little bit of wrath here and there is not the day of the Lord. From what I
Right.
understood, it was the full cup, his full fierce wrath being poured out on the nations.
And any of the other, to put it a different way, minor wraths or things that have happened, judgments that have happened. Because Becky, you might be referring, for instance, to what happened to him in the days of Ezekiel, Daniel, and all that, where they were taken into captivity and all of that. And in the book of Ezekiel, because we studied it and it really struck me, the picture that Ezekiel was given to give to them is, well, number one, they were told to leave Jerusalem and surrender to Nebuchadnezzar, which I put myself in their shoes. I don't know that I could have believed that. You know, I'm just like, could I have done that? Right. But so the people that stayed in Jerusalem were in a pot, a melting pot, it says. Jerusalem became a melting pot. The fire was going to be built up underneath it, and they were going to be melted or destroyed. That definitely sounds like wrath. I get it. That definitely sounds like wrath, but it is not the great day of God's wrath, as Janice is saying. It's not that. So that's bad, right? The Holocaust is really bad. I actually had somebody tell me one time that they decided to be all millennial, meaning no millennial reign, and everything that is wrapped into that, because how in the world could they ever look a Jew in the eye and say it's going to be worse than the Holocaust? And I just looked at him and said, because you should be telling them it's going to be worse than the Holocaust. I mean, that's not a good reason to change over to something else, because every one of those things has given us a taste, or really them, because we didn't experience it in time, a taste of how bad it's going to be. Just a taste. It'd be like dipping your finger in the icing and tasting the icing, but you haven't had a whole piece of cake, right? It's just experiencing it a little bit. So you think about Jesus when he was outside the temple in this final week of his life. This week that we're celebrating, right? And he's talking to his disciples, and they say, "What are the signs of the times, and when will these things happen?" There's two different places. One's Matthew and one's Mark. And by the way, they're not the same. They look a lot alike, but they're not the same. Jesus answers differently in those two passages. But one of the things he says is he looks around at the temple buildings, which were buildings at that time. They're not there now, but they were in Jesus's day. And he said, no stone will be upon another. And when Nebuchadnezzar came and they destroyed in their third siege, they destroyed the temple wall, they destroyed it all. They ripped apart the stones of the temple because between them was gold and they were harvesting the gold. So when you go to Jerusalem, if you do, I've never been, and you've got what's called the Wailing Wall, which they believe is the Western Wall of the temple. That's it. But I don't even think that's it. That might be foundation, but there was no stone left upon another. That's what Jesus predicted. And he said, he mentions the abomination of desolation. Now, Jesus is saying this in, 33 AD, whatever time exactly it was. We believe it's about 33 AD. Jesus is saying this about the abomination of desolation. You have to go backwards. You have to go backwards to the Roman general called Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus, I don't know how you pronounce his name. Antiochus Epiphanes. He hated the Jews. And he would go through Israel on his way to battle some other general, and then that general would come through. And so Israel was literally just this land bridge that they would travel through and decimate. And Antiochus Epiphanes hated the Jews. So one day he went into the temple and he slaughtered a pig in the temple and set up a statue of Zeus, desecrated the temple by so doing. That desecrated. Number one, he was not supposed to be in the building. High priest only in there, right? Or priest and the high priest only into the Holy of Holies. Setting up Zeus, that's an abomination. Slaughtering a pig, of all things, that's an abomination. And Jesus is referring to a future abomination of desolation, referring back to one that has already happened. So the one that had happened in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadowing of something to come. Just like all these, we're just going to call them mini wraths, but they're not many, they're horrible, are a foreshadowing of something much bigger that's coming. Not to mention the fact that, let's say those were isolated wraths on whether it's Jerusalem or Babylon or any of the others that we can name, Edom, Tyre, Sidon, all of those. If you name any of them, that was isolated to an area. This wrath of God is worldwide. It's worldwide. And there are specific prophecies that have yet to happen or only have happened in a smaller way with a larger fulfillment later that are going to happen to Jerusalem. And like I said, I think it's Zechariah. Malachi or Zechariah, one of them. One of the last books of the Bible talks about 2/3 being cut off and 1/3 remaining. That's the third that's going to be believing in Jesus at that point, and they will be saved. Therefore, the New Testament tells us, thus all Israel will be saved, because it's the remnant portion that's left. I mean, we could go on and on and on. There's so much to the eschatology, and it's not easy, Becky. It's not easy to nail it down and say with absolutes. There's some things I can absolutely tell you. And we'll get into it in Second Thessalonians, because we're going to talk about this man of lawlessness and the apostasy and how he goes into the temple and sets him up to be God. I think I just foreshadowed that for you, right? That would be like a temple of Zeus being set up, right? That would be an abomination. So this is going to be a part of that timeline. There's some things that we can timeline. And Jim was just saying it again, as I started out saying, Paul is more involved in this passage about how we're to live in light of what's coming, in light of the praise God, we don't face the wrath of God. I mean, if that alone is the only thing you take today, just go about praising God that you don't have to face that wrath. But also realizing you don't want to face it, you don't want anybody else to face it. So what does that emphasize for you? Sharing the gospel with everyone. And even seriously, people you don't like. People that have been mean to you. Do you want them to go through that? I don't. No. I mean, people that have done horrible things to me, I don't want them to go through that.
I think you should be afraid for them. That's what I think. I mean, that's a good attitude to take, because when you know this is going to happen, you should have afraid for them, because what's going to come upon them,
Yeah. I mean, we're going to have a bird's eye view, but if we were sitting there, are we going to go, oh, he just zapped that one. I'm glad he zapped that one. No.
That's not the heart of God.
No, I mean, I believe we're going to have God's perspective, and God's not zapping people to be mean. He's not that, to use stupid terminology, but he's not, but it's coming, and it's based on being either a they or an us, right? We want to be in that column. Make sure, Paul says, be sure of your salvation, be examining yourself to make sure you're in the faith. And if you are, and you're confident in that, it's not complacency, it's being awake, being sober, being alert, telling others, having that we're putting on that helmet of salvation, which protects our mind from the attacks and doubts, but it also should then, it's on our heads. We should be telling people we have a hope of salvation. I want you to have that hope of salvation. We have faith and love as our breastplate. We're sons of light and sons and daughters of light and day. We're not darkness. And I remember hearing the sermon one time where it was Wayne Barber, and he was talking about not only we were in darkness. Remember, we've been translated from that kingdom into the kingdom of light, kingdom of Jesus. Thank God. But they are not just in darkness, they are darkness. Okay. It is who they are. And if God chooses them as his elect, they will come into light and no longer be in darkness. But that darkness hides their activities. That darkness, that's the reason they like darkness, because they can do the deeds of darkness, right? And people aren't going to see or know. But some people could take this and mean you're never to drink. Well, I can make a case for always being sober, because it says to be sober. And he does talk about drinking and being drunk. But the main part is if you can have a glass of wine every now and then and stay on alert, then God's not forbidding it. But you might choose instead to just stay sober all the time. That's not really the point. The point is sober in the sense of being serious, being thinking about these things, living your life in light of them. This is the point of these first 11 verses in this chapter is wake up and don't be complacent and don't just go sit on a hill waiting for Jesus's return. But always be ready for it. Like be looking for it. I love it when it say eyes to the sky, ready to fly, be looking up all the time. But at the same time, somehow look into the world and deal with life too. But just have that awareness and share that with others. Please take that part too. Paul did that. He traveled all over the place to share this with people. And this was part of what he taught. We've got to put that into our gospel message. Is not just Jesus is coming back. That's wonderful news. That's wonderful and it's great, and explain that. But maybe tell them about the wrath of God that they've avoided and that others may, because when you've just come out of darkness, guess who you know? A lot of people in darkness. But guess who even sometimes the longer you're a Christian, the more you kind of buffered from that, because most of the people you hang out with are Christians, which is not a bad thing. But we still interact with people on a daily basis that are not saved. And we have this truth that we can share. So that's part of our being on alert and being sober. If we're sober-minded about this, we want others to know about it. So Paul is not answering the question of when. He's answering the question of how now shall we live? And again, we didn't go into all the verses that we looked at this week, but if anything, hopefully you took that somberness out of all of that reference to the day of the Lord. It's bad. It's really bad. And Becky, I hope that answered some of your questions. Obviously not all of them, because we didn't go to specifics about this chapter and that verse, but I just understand that, as we were saying, there is something worse coming. And it's, if nothing else, it's going to destroy what we know. It's going to destroy everything. You look around you, everything that you see right now. Only souls are going to be, only people are going to be preserved through it. The world is going to burn up. All the elements are going to be destroyed. Everything that we now know, because again, read the book of Revelation. There's a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem that comes out of heaven down to earth. And then there's going to be a millennial reign. And then there's going to be the rest of eternity. I don't even know how to say that, right?
Amen.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be great. Can you imagine 1,000 years here on Earth
That-
prior to the destruction?
Yeah, that's something that we should talk about it with the Christians, build each other up like that. And that's very encouraging. That's what Paul's saying here.
Yes. And that's what he says in 11 to wrap it up is encourage one another and build up one another just as you're also doing. So they were already doing that. Again, commendation, already doing that. You may already be doing that. Do it more. Excel still more. Let's take chapter 4. Excel still more. This is another of those things we need to be encouraged in. And I'm not trying to beat up your pastor or any other pastor, but just understand that you might ask him, like, why don't we talk about this more? And again, not trying to put him on the spot, but just there's a lot of times there's reason and maybe, I mean, if you've been a pastor for a while, you may have taught on this in the past and you're on to other things, and all of it's important. Everything's important, right? So, but I just think about this book has really done a good job of showing that how Paul went, what he said, and what we should take from that, how we should be presenting the gospel, how we should be creating disciples, and then teaching them how to be disciples and to get other disciples. And it grows and grows and grows. And Paul did that, obviously, because immediately they turned and shared with others and were examples and took as examples others while they were being persecuted. This wasn't an easy time. They were being persecuted, livelihoods were taken away, some may have died as a result, and they have concerns and questions, and Paul's answering those, and he'll continue to answer, I'm sure, in the Second Thessalonians. But we can take Paul's example, take a page from his book, and live out this ourselves. And I'm just telling you personally, I have not thought of talking about the day of the Lord or Jesus's return as part of the gospel presentation. We may need to adjust that. I will. Okay, let's end and we'll watch the video here in a minute and come back next week and finish this book and then start Second Thessalonians after that. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this reminder. We thank you that we are not destined for wrath. That is the most gracious thing that I can think of in this moment. There's so many things, though. Salvation, Christ coming, this week that we have that we're focused on, from what we know historically was Palm Sunday to the events of the resurrection. Keep us mindful of those things and grateful, and we praise you for all of it, but also keep us on track in understanding that there's others that don't know these things, that we need to share it with them, and give us those opportunities. Make us aware in the moment of being able to share with someone, start a conversation that might start a teaching time that might span years even. We thank you for these opportunities and for these reminders, and we thank you for it all in Jesus' name. Amen.